From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Open Line.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Open Line. Glad you are with us tonight. There's, of course, a lot going on, as there always is. As we keep an eye on Louisville following the grand jury decision there, we are talking about calls for police reform here in Nashville. We have with us via Zoom, as all our guests are now via Zoom, two people with NOAH, and that stands for Nashville Organized for Action and Hope. They can explain in a moment exactly what NOAH is, but NOAH has been making some calls for police reform here in Nashville. Happy to have with us Jane Boram and Teresa Smallwood. Thank you both for being here. And Jane, let me start with you. So I guess briefly explain what NOAH is for those who don't know what NOAH is.
NOAH is made up of about 66, 68 congregations, labor unions, neighborhood associations, organizations, volunteer organizations, and all of those 68 organizations combine their efforts to make different changes within the system regarding issues that are voted upon democratically at what we call an issues convention. And so when you have an issues convention, sometimes you'll have up to 350, 500 people who prioritize what the issues are. And the last issues convention we had, the priorities were economic justice, in other words, jobs, equity and jobs, education, affordable housing, and criminal justice. So those are what we have been working on, at least since our last issues convention in June of 2019.
And you've made some calls.
They were the same.
Right. You've made some calls for change. And Teresa, I want to ask you, you are, I believe, the Community Justice Task Force leader. Is that right, with NOAH?
I'm not the leader, but I am a member of the task force. Jane is the co-leader of that task force.
Okay, great. What is that task force calling for?
Well, we made some requests at a press conference that were condensed requests, and they happen to basically fall on four platforms. The suspension of no-knock warrants. We want to know, as the public, what are the exact dates when body and dash cams will be implemented in every police precinct. We want to know, what will be happening in terms of the reporting. Will there be quarterly external independent audits of current and future body and dash cams? And then the reason why I call this condensed is that we want to know whether or not there will be an implementation of what is known popularly as the hashtag 8CAN'TWAIT. And I'll go into that if you'd like me to.
Sure, very briefly. I mean, 8 can't wait, but that is something that you are calling for, and you've sent a letter saying we want this implemented.
Absolutely. 8 can't wait basically is a condensation or a hashtag that helps represent what's being called for nationally by Campaign Zero. And that has to do with banning chokeholds and strangleholds, requiring de-escalation, requiring warnings before shooting, exhausting all alternatives before shooting, the duty to intervene, banning shooting at moving vehicles, establishing the use of force continuum, and requiring all force be reported.
So you sent a letter, NOAH sent a letter to the new interim police chief, John Drake. You sent that earlier this month. And what has the reaction been? How far, and Jane, I'll let you take this, how far, what has the reaction been, and how far along are you in kind of seeing this happen?
The mayor and interim chief Drake both responded to our press conference and the letter that was sent to each of them after the press conference, listing all of what Teresa said. They were polite letters, and they tried to, especially Chief Drake's letter, tried to deal with details. Our concern with Chief Drake's response is that some of the language that he uses when he talks about use of force is vague. And we saw that happen with the Edge Hill raid on a woman's home in the Edgehill Apartments, which was the wrong address. It was a botched warrant that wasn't even supposed to be served at that address. The door was broken into. She had no clothes on. She asked them not to come in. She didn't have clothes on. They burst in anyway. Those are the kinds of display of force, display of firearms that we don't think are necessary and could have all been prevented. Even Chief Drake admits those could have been prevented.
And he disciplined some of the officers involved in that.
He did decommission those officers. The point is, those aren't just those particular officers. This is a pattern across the country. This is a pattern of disrespect for other persons without proceeding in a justice-oriented fashion before someone's rights are violated. That was a very traumatic experience for her, this woman and her children. And the fact that it could have been avoided means that there needs to be some retraining and rethinking, not just retraining, but rethinking of how use of force is used in this police department.
So that is what you're asking for. At the end of your letter that you sent, you said failure to meet our immediate demands will result in taking direct action on decision makers through demonstrations, protests, and other forms of disruption. So where does that stand right now? And I'll let, Teresa take that.
Teresa, you want to talk to that?
Yes. The fortunate thing about NOAA is that we are a pluralistic organization of faith communities. So when we talk about direct action, we're doing so on two different levels, spiritually and emotionally, politically. What we mean by that is that we are fired up at the notion that over this nation, there are people being confronted every day with the possibility of death because we do not have a strong understanding of the parameters around police brutality and the use of force. And so when NOAA says we will take direct action, we mean what we did at our press conference. We mean rallying the troops as it relates to people who vote. We mean engaging in voter education. And we mean most definitely protests. We are not intimidated by anything that our legislature has done to suggest that protests should be felonious. We take position that ours is a voice of the people that will be heard, but we are confined to the modes and the tenets of our faith.
And so are you moving in that direction, or do you feel like enough is being done to address your concerns here in Nashville? What do you see happening in the next week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? Jane, I'll let you take that.
Well, I know the Policing Commission continues to meet. This is who Mayor Cooper appointed. There are many people on this commission. One of our own NOAA members is on that commission. She's actually vice chair of the Use of Force Committee. And so is Ashley Davis, who is the chair of the COB. So the two of them are in a unique position to influence that committee. But that's just one committee of a large commission. It's made up of about 30 or 40 people. Now, all those folks are supposedly going to help with the selection process of the new chief. This is a long, drawn-out thing. In October, the beginning of October, supposedly the first week in October, Mayor Cooper wants to make a decision about who the next chief will be. I am not so sure we're ready for that. I'm not sure we have heard enough screenings of who might even be in the offing for that, and whether or not they are willing to go along with the attributes and the qualities that we had submitted. We were asked to give those characteristics and attributes of a chief to the mayor, and we did that. And for example, number 4 is she should be willing to work with the FOP, but also be willing to recognize and act when the union is jeopardizing public safety by keeping MNPD officers in place who violated public trust and their actions towards citizens. And then
and the FOP is the Fraternal Order of Police, right? Fraternal Order of Police.
who sometimes go to bat for someone who has shown police misconduct, despite the fact that this is a grave error in judgment on that police officer's behavior. And, standing by someone who's made a terrible, life-threatening decision, it just does not seem to be in the best interest of citizens. The other thing is, we said that there should be significant changes. We want the chief to make significant changes to use of force guidelines, ending qualified immunity and stripping officers of pensions if found guilty of excessive force. And so that has happened in Nashville. And we're very lucky that we haven't had a Breonna Taylor incident. We're just like this far away from it. And we don't need to be putting our citizens at risk like that. That's not public safety. That's public endangerment.
And all right, so there are a couple letters now. You're talking about a letter you sent saying these are the qualities we want in the next police chief. That's from July, I believe. This other letter from just this month talks about the inequitable city structure that permeates every operating system from the top down. For far too long, there have been two systems of justice in the United States, including Nashville, one for white Americans, one for Americans of color. So that's in the letter that was sent, calling for change. And I'll ask you, Teresa, just how broken, that's strong language, how broken do you think things are? How far are we from turning things around, in your opinion?
I want to say at the outset that I do believe NOAA has forged a strong relationship of open communication with and among governmental entities. The whole idea behind our movement, our action, is to keep those lines of communication open and to help people understand, who are decision makers, that we are not going to be denied. What we're putting forth are reasonable requests based upon things that have happened historically here. But make no mistake, we're not dealing with just the interim. We're also looking at the long term. In this particular county, in Nashville proper, we have had a great number of instances, and I don't need to run them down for you today, wherein police brutality was a serious issue. Now that we are seeing this issue laid bare in the community across the nation, it is further fodder for the fire that we change things. And so when we talk about the things that we are making demands for, while there have been interim responses, particularly by Chief Drake, who is the interim chief, that seem to be assuading the issues, we are not satisfied that they will translate into the appointment of a chief of police. Therefore, we have to cover all bases. And the letter that Jane referred to was responded to both by the mayor as well as the chief. And there was a great deal of that seemed to be moving in the direction of the things we're demanding. But there needs to be more clarity. And in that commission, there needs to be serious response given to the capacity for a community oversight board to have the kind of power it needs to be the very oversight that 8,000 people signed a petition to bring forth.
So there has been this moment where we have seen protests, where we have seen calls for change, and that has been happening for several months. And my question, I guess, to you all is, how far along are we, do you feel like? Have we made progress? Have we made some progress? No progress? And how much more progress would you like to see? Kind of where are we in that progression? And either one of you can take that.
Go ahead, Chase.
When we talk about the use of force, we have not made the kind of progress that is even remarkable, because no one has said what the continuum is. So I don't know, does that mean that we can have another simulation of a no-knock warrant with a black woman and her 2 children who have not even had a chance to get out of bed? But because we say police, that then becomes a continuum of that use of force? No, it needs to be spelled out. It has not been. And so what happened in Green Hills, Edge Hill could literally happen in Green Hills. And what I want for us to understand that continuums don't speak anything clear that communities of faith can really understand.
The other concern is if you look at the protests that happened downtown over the summer, a lot of that was directed not just at Nashville's police, but at the entire system, and especially at the state level. And of course, who came down on that? State legislators, because they felt very intimidated and very backed into a corner and felt like they were like really just on the spot and didn't have much of a response except to like clamp down and say, well, we'll just send you to prison for 6 years for, just coming out on the sidewalk here and with a protest sign, which is absolutely, unconstitutional. I mean, the whole issue of free speech does not put somebody in prison for just protesting peacefully.
Now, my understanding was that was if they camped out. Is that right? If they camped out there?
Well, there are other issues that were part of that whole law that the state passed also. It's not just the camping out. So, people have to be very careful now what they do and how they go about it. And it's as though there's no room for dissent. This was an attempt to squash dissent, to not listen to the people. And these are young people. These aren't older people like Teresa and me. These aren't persons who've been through a lot of previous civil rights demonstrations and have already been to jail. I've been to jail. I'm not about ready to go to jail again at the age of 73. But some of these younger kids, they're willing to do that. Is that really necessary just to be able to express free speech?
So you've been down this road before. How confident are you this will be a time of change, that we will get to a better place, or a place that would be closer to what you're talking about in this letter? Or do you think we will miss this moment? And I'll let you, Jane, and then Teresa answer that.
I pray to God that we don't miss this moment, because young people see the violation of their rights. They see the violation of Black Americans. They see how wrong racial injustice is. This is the first time, I think, in this country that we have had whites and blacks so riled up about the misuse of lethal force in this country, and just how questionable it is and how wrong it is. In the past, even in the desegregation movements of the past, and in the efforts of the civil rights movement under Dr. King, I don't think most of America was as riled up against something like this. I mean, there were laws passed, but it seemed like, you were sort of morally placed into a position where it just seemed like you had to do this just to make ourselves look better for the rest of the world. Now, Americans are saying, we want to do this for ourselves. This isn't a matter of just looking good to another country or just trying to get out of a bad spot. This is what we inherently need to do to be human to one another, to be respectful of one another, to understand that each person is a person of God, a child of God. This is a spiritual issue, and it's very serious.
And so you hope that we don't miss the moment. And so I'll ask you, Teresa, do you think, what do you think will happen? Do you think that we will make major changes here, or are you concerned that the moment could be missed?
Well, I think some alliances are coming about that we didn't necessarily expect. And I have hope that we will seize the moment. And my hope comes from the fact that right now the wagons are being circled on the state level around what goes on in Nashville in such a way that the will of the people is one thing that can be leveraged. Because our mayor had his hand slapped by the governor recently on behalf of the people. And my contention is that when we think about something like you saying, it was just if they camp out, well, do we realize the implications of that? What that really targets is the fact that there are people camping out all over this city because of homelessness. And what are we doing? We're criminalizing poverty. So yes, there is a quite nuanced way in which I am very, very hopeful that we will strike the balance, allow the will of the people to speak, and be in a contention where we as a city, as a county, are resolute in our resolve that we'll stand together and do what's needed. And just like families have conflict, we can also come together, both to the aid of our mayor and of those who are trying to do right, and for the whole world to see that really when good people get together, they can make strong, right decisions.
All right, well, that kind of sets the table for the discussion. We have a few calls. Jim, Justin, hold on the line. If you want to call in, there's room. So go ahead, give us a call. There's the number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.